This is the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, France. The museum undoubtedly houses the best collection of French artwork from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Technically, they only exhibit works created between 1848 and 1914, including the largest collection of Impressionist works in the world. And it's all housed inside a former railroad station. Out front there are statues representing the 6 continents. These were created for the 1878 Exposition Universelle at the Palais Trocadero, which no longer stands. This is a statue of a young elephant caught in a trap, which was created for the 1878 World's Fair. And here's a statue of a rhinoceros, also created for the 1878 World's Fair. Alright, we have entered the Musée d'Orsay, a unique space for an art museum, as this was a railroad station. It was known as the Gare d'Orsay, which opened in 1900 in time for the 1900 Exposition Universelle. The station was closed down in 1973 and it was going to be demolished, but luckily it was saved and turned into an amazing art museum. When I was very young, I got to visit this museum, but back then they did not allow photography. I am so happy that they reversed that policy. That was a great move by the museum. First, I'm going to head up to the upper level to see the Van Goghs. The Van Gogh rooms here at the Musée d'Orsay are amazing. Starting out with a classic, Vincent van Gogh's bedroom in Arles. He made 3 nearly identical versions of this scene of his bedroom in the Arles house. This one is slightly smaller than the other 2. He intended this one to go back to his family in Holland. This is Le Restaurant de la Sirène à Asnières from 1887. This one is titled Fritelaire Couronne Impériale dans un vase de Quievre, which he painted while living here in Paris. Van Gogh painted this scene of L'Osteria à Montmartre, Le Billard en Bois in 1886. This is a Van Gogh self-portrait painted in 1887. This is L'Arlésienne, a portrait of a woman whose real name was Madame Genoux. Van Gogh had lived in her house when he was first in Arles, and later on she looked after Vincent at the hospital, as she suffered from nervous breakdowns as well. This is a portrait of Eugene Bosch, with a starry background. Bosch was a Belgian painter, who Van Gogh met in Paris. Oh wow, this is one of my favorites. The Starry Night on the Rhone. He painted this in Arles in 1888. It is the predecessor to Starry Night. The color of this painting is pretty incredible, and even more so seeing it in person. Here is La Salle de Danse à Arles. This is The Italian Woman, a portrait of Agostina Segatori, who had previously been a model for Manet and Corot. Apparently Van Gogh may have had a short relationship with this woman. There's definitely some Japanese influences in this one. This is The Church at Auvers, an iconic portrayal of the church at Auvers-sur-Oise, where Van Gogh spent his final months. These are Les Deux Fillettes from 1890. Here are some more Van Gogh flowers, specifically roses and anemones. Here's the classic portrait of Dr. Paul Gachet. He was why Van Gogh went to live there. Dr. Gachet was actually a big fan of art and friends with many of the Impressionists. This is Van Gogh's depiction of Dr. Gachet's garden. Here's a portrayal of Mademoiselle Gachet in the garden. That's Dr. Gachet's daughter. This is perhaps the most famous self-portrait of Vincent van Gogh, with a surreal one-of-a-kind background. Around the time he made this one in 1889, He wrote to his brother Theo that, quote, "The portraits painted by Rembrandt are more than a view of nature. They are more like a revelation." And this one is titled Chaume de Cordeville à Auvers-sur-Oise, which he painted just a few weeks before his death in Auvers. This is an Oviri, a clay figure made by Paul Gauguin in 1894. He apparently got into ceramics for a while. This is fascinating. Panels carved by Paul Gauguin that were part of his Maison de Jouir. It was above the entryway to his house during the last years of his life, on the island of Atuona in French Polynesia. This is a Paul Gauguin self-portrait with a hat, but it's actually a double-sided painting. There's another portrait on the back side, but we can't see it. Here are some Paul Gauguin depictions of Polynesians at Tahiti. There's a couple canes, and a poignard dagger carved by Gauguin. This is the White Horse, painted in 1898. It was commissioned by a pharmacist in Tahiti, who rejected it because the white horse was too green. These are some works by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, who captured the nightlife of Montmartre. Here's a group of Toulouse-Lautrec dancing scenes. The one on the left depicts Jane Avril dancing. She was a very popular dancer at the Moulin Rouge and Les Folies Bergerac. Next to her is Cha Yu Kao, who was a clown dancer. This is La Femme de Profil, probably a depiction of Madame Lucy. These are the Arbres sur un fond jaune, made by Rodin Adelon. These are authentic shadow puppets from the famed Chat Noir Cabaret. They would use these to produce a puppet show of silhouettes, which were shown through layered painted glass sheets. That's pretty neat. Here's an aerial view of the Gare d'Orsay terminal. Trains used to run right through here. There's a look out of one of the clock faces on the facade. You can see Sacré-Cœur in Montmartre out of it. This is a street in Paris in May of 1871, the bloody week when the Commune emerged from the chaos of the fall of the Second Empire. This is Le Cirque by Georges Seurat, a fantastic pointillist piece. Here's the entrance to the port at La Rochelle by Paul Signac. And here's another Seurat depicting the harbor at Port-en-Bessin at high tide. There's a pointillist work of Henri Edmond Cross. Here's a grouping of smaller Georges Seurat pieces, including Le Petit Paysan en Bleu. Next to it are some studies for his much larger, more complex masterpieces, including The Bathers at Asnières and A Sunday on La Grande Jatte. This is a woman with a coffee pot by Paul Cézanne from 1895. This woman was probably employed at the Cézanne home in Aix-en-Provence. Here are some more Cézanne works, including a great still life, one of his specialties, and one of his many bather scenes. These are portraits by Paul Cézanne. In the center is a paysan assis, a sitting farmer, and he's flanked by two card players. This Cézanne still life is titled Nature Morte aux Oignons, so those are onions. These are the Young Girls at a Piano, a famous 1892 masterpiece of Pierre-Auguste Renoir. These Impressionism galleries are fantastic. There's Cézanne's on one side of the room, and Renoir's on the other. These are Blue Water Lilies by Claude Monet, inspired by his water lily pond at Giverny. This one is called Falaise de Fécamp by Claude Monet. The Musée d'Orsay maintains some of Claude Monet's series on the Rouen Cathedral. He made these almost identical portrayals of the cathedral in the 1890s, each depicting a slightly different time of day and year, so the lighting changes significantly. It's neat to see a bunch of them side by side. This is a portrayal of Camille Monet on her deathbed. Claude Monet created the scene of his first wife on her deathbed in 1879. She passed away when she was 32 years old. This is Tempête, Le Côte de Belle Isle by Monet. Here's one of Monet's haystacks. This one in particular depicts how it looked at the end of the summer in 1891. This Monet is titled En Norvégien, inspired from his trip to Norway. And to round out the Monet room, here are Les Rochers de Belle Isle de la Côte Sauvage from 1886. Here are some Edgar Degas sculptures cast in bronze that were found in his studio after he passed away. This collection is unbelievable. Here are some Camille Pissarro pieces. The one on the right depicts the port of Rouen. They sure have a lot of Pissarros. He was definitely one of the key impressionists and the most successful early on. This is The Girl in the Garden by Mary Cassatt. She was an American who moved to Paris, got to know the impressionists like Degas, and started painting for herself in that style. This is Les Coteaux de Vessonet by Pissarro from 1871. On the right is a Monet titled Effet de Neige à Vétuile. It's a snowy scene featuring a church. Here's an Alfred Sisley painting titled Le Pont de Moray. These two are called City Dance and Country Dance. Painted in 1883 by Pierre-Auguste Renoir, they were created to be displayed together, showing the differences between a more formal and uptight middle-class couple in the city versus a more relaxed and fun dance of a working-class couple in the country. Here are some more Monet landscapes from the late 1870s. The one on the left depicts the Seine at Vétuile. This one is called Les Glaçons. Here are even more Monets. On the right is Etretat, La Plage et la Porte de Mont from 1882. These are all by Camille Pissarro. This is a Matinée d'automne dans le Jardin d'Aragny by Pissarro. This one is titled The Sheardress by Paul Cézanne from 1881. This is a Field of Banana Trees by Renoir from 1881. He painted this after traveling in Algeria. This is an Algerian mosque scene painted by Renoir. On the right is a portrait of Renoir's wife and their son, alongside a portrait of Edouard Manet's daughter by Renoir. Speaking of Manet, here is one of his works, called Les Dames aux Éventails. This is an authentic cast of Edgar Degas' Little Dancer, probably his most famous sculpture. The original wax version of this sculpture was the only one he exhibited during his lifetime. Degas was more well known for his paintings. These are some horse jockey scenes he did. But he is most well known for his ballerina dancers. This is La Foyer de la Danse à l'Opéra de la Rue Le Pelletier. Here's another classic Degas ballet scene. The Degas painting on the right depicts an orchestra for an opera. This is the ballet class, painted in the early 1870s. I really like this one, Monet's depiction of a patriotic party on la Rue Montorgueil in 1878. There's French flags and streamers hanging all over the place. This is The Floor Scrapers by Gustave Caillebotte. It depicts workmen cleaning a Paris apartment. It was rejected by the elitist 1875 Salon. This painting by Edgar Degas is titled In a Café, also known as L'Absinthe. This may have been intended as a denunciation of absinthe liquor. This is an early work of Paul Gauguin from 1875, depicting the Pont de l'Éna on the Seine here in Paris. On the left is The Cradle by Bertha Morisot, and on the right, La Pedicure by Edgar Degas. Here are some 1870s pieces by Pissarro, Cezanne, and Sisley. This 1873 Cezanne is called The Hanged Man's House. He was working with his mentor Camille Pissarro and Auvers-sur-Oise when he made this. This is a portrait of Claude Monet by Pierre-Auguste Renoir. These are the Regattes à Argenteuil by Monet. And here are some more boats at Argenteuil by Monet, alongside a piece by Alfred Sisley at the top, and there's a Pissarro below it. This is an iconic painting by Renoir, called Le Bal de Moulin de la Galette, painted in 1876. It is a scene from the Moulin de la Galette in Montmartre. It was an establishment that attracted a lot of working class people in Paris. Lots of the Impressionists would also go there regularly. This is a portrait of Alphonsine Fornés by Renoir. This is Edouard Manet's Luncheon on the Grass, which caused quite a scandal back when it was first unveiled in 1863. It was rejected by the Paris Salon. However, it was exhibited at the Salon des Refuses, the Salon of Rejects that year. Here a nude woman is on a picnic with two fully clothed men in a very open natural landscape. That was very controversial. And directly across from it is Claude Monet's Luncheon on the Grass, which he painted later on in 1865 and 66. Some of Monet's friends are all depicted fully clothed, having a picnic at Fontainebleau. He made this to rival Manet's more scandalous original, but Monet was never quite able to finish this huge painting, as he had to offer it up as security for a rent payment. By the time he got it back, it was in poor condition, so some of the painting is gone. On the top is a Manet still life, and below it a Monet still life. This is an homage to Delacroix, painted in 1864. It depicts a number of painters in front of a portrait of the great Eugene Delacroix, who had passed away the year before. Here's a Manet portrait next to a Monet landscape. This is Le Pont de Chemin de Fer à Argenteuil, an 1873 piece by Monet. This is The Butterfly Hunt by Bertha Morisot, which he painted in 1874. This one is wonderful. It's called Poppies, but sometimes it's known as The Promenade, by Claude Monet. It depicts his wife Camille and their son in a poppy field at Argenteuil. And on the right there's another piece by Alfred Sisley. This is a panel made by Toulouse-Lautrec for the booth of a cabaret dancer named La Goulou at the Foire de Tron. It depicts La Goulou doing her exotic dance. Toulouse-Lautrec put himself in the audience, as is Jane Avril and Oscar Wilde. Here's another big Toulouse-Lautrec panel for La Goulou's booth. It's a commemoration to the Moulin Rouge, where La Goulou danced before. The panels are right by another clock face, through which Toulouse-Lautrec's beloved Montmartre is visible. Here's another angle of the magnificent former railroad terminal. This place really is fantastic. And there's a lot more to see. I haven't even looked down there yet. This gallery contains some Art Nouveau pieces from Austria, Great Britain, and the United States. The arts and crafts style was popular for a time in the US. Vienna was another hotspot for Art Nouveau architecture. I need to be moving on, so I can't look too closely at the Art Nouveau displays, but here is a chair and desk by Frank Lloyd Wright. There is another gallery featuring Art Nouveau furnishings and elements from here in Northern Europe, as well as Central Europe. It was even popular for a time in Scandinavia. This is a water mirror from Stockholm. That's neat. Now back on the ground level, where the train platforms used to be. This space is filled with some incredible sculptures. This is L'Action Enchaînée by Aristide Maillol, and behind it is a painting known as the Roman Orgy. I did come to the Musée d'Orsay to see their special Antoni Gaudí exhibition. It had lots of Gaudí designed furnishings, as well as the sketches and plans for his whimsical structures in Barcelona. That is featured in a separate video, linked in the description. This is a monumental painting by Gustave Courbet, titled A Burial at Ornans, which was displayed in the 1850 Salon. Here's another massive work of Courbet's called The Artist's Studio. It got rejected for the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1855, so the artist paid to have his own exhibit building constructed for a solo exhibition. These are some buffs, or some cows, by Constant Troyan. This is a pretty awesome equestrian statue of Napoleon. The original ornate clock of the Gare d'Orsay is beautiful, and it definitely helps to keep an eye on the time at this enormous museum. The galleries on this level cover early and mid 19th century French art. These are some romantic pieces. Here's a great sketch by Eugène Delacroix called The Lion Hunt, which he created in 1855, inspired from his travels in Morocco. Here's another Delacroix called La Puma. This one is called La Gruffa, which means the abyss, a landscape by Paul Huet from 1861. This is Orpheus by Louis Francois. Here's a whole wall full of romantic style biblical scenes. This is The Birth of Venus by Alexandre Cabanel, a painting made popular in the 1863 Salon. It was purchased by Napoleon III and was part of his art collection. There are lots of naked ladies in this room. This is a rather graphic scene, showing a summary execution without judgment under the Moorish kings of Granada. Here's another painting by Eugène Delacroix called The Passage d'un Gueux à Maroc. It's another Moroccan scene. This is the original cast for Carpeau's sculpture Gauguin and Toulouse-Lautrec, which he made in 1860. The real sculpture is here at the Musée d'Orsay. This room is full of pieces from the personal collection of Dr. Gachet. Here are some more early works of Camille Pissarro, and one by Paul Cézanne on the right. They both knew Dr. Gachet. On the top is Cézanne's still life of Pommes Vertes, and below it is Dr. Gachet's imitation of the Cézanne painting. He dabbled in Impressionism as well. This Cézanne is titled Nature Morte à la Soupière. Here's another Cézanne, a still life with a medallion. And here's yet another early Cézanne still life from 1867 of a kettle and some pears. This is a Cézanne portrait of L'Avocat, his uncle Dominique. This is a very unique work of Cézanne, a portrait of Achille Empereur. He was considered as a dwarf, but he was himself a painter. The two artists met during the 1860s and remained friends for a time. Here Cézanne depicted him as an emperor on a throne. These are both Cézannes. On the left is Une Moderne Olympia from 1873, based on Manet's Olympia, which we'll see soon. And on the right is The Temptation of St. Anthony. These are portraits by Renoirs. This is The Balcony by Edouard Manet from 1868. The woman sitting down is Bertha Morisot. The left and middle pieces are Manet. The one on the right is a Monet. This is a self-portrait done by Edgar Degas in 1855. This whole room is full of early Degas works. This is the Bolelli family portrait painted by Degas between 1858 and 1867. And here are some Degas portrayals of sculptured heads. Here's a wall covered by the paintings of Jean-François Millet, the founder of the Barbizon School of Realist Art. This is probably Millet's most famous piece, called The Gleaners from 1857. It is a very realistic scene of peasant women gleaning in a wheat field. This is empathetic to the lower working class, and apparently the upper classes of French society did not like this painting much when it was first exhibited. This is L'Angelus by Millet, completed in 1859, showing two peasants bowing in prayer over a basket of potatoes. Millet was a big inspiration to Vincent van Gogh. These are caricature celebrity busts made by Honoré Daumier in the 1830s. These were sponsored by a satirical newspaper. This is a painting called Un amende honorable by Alphonse Legros, who was inspired to make this after seeing the Spanish paintings at the Louvre. This is a man with a pipe by James McNeill Whistler. This one is titled La Fête Dieu by Alexandre Antigna. Here are Les Chaussures de Vincennes by Alfred Stevens. There is an infamous up-close painting of lady parts over there that I probably should not show too closely on YouTube. This is a landscape by Gustave Courbet, a leading realist from his era. This one is Le Ruisseau Noir by Courbet. And this one is titled Le Mur Orgeuse from 1870. This room is packed with Edouard Manet paintings. This is Olympia, which he painted in 1863 and exhibited at the Salon of 1865. The nude white woman is Olympia. She's laying on a bed giving off a confrontational gaze. That was quite scandalous at the time. It was assumed that she was a prostitute, but she also has a black maid bringing her flowers in the background. That part is more controversial nowadays. This is a portrait of the great writer and art critic Émile Zola from 1868. He was friends with Edouard Manet. I really like this one. It is a Spanish fifer by Manet from 1866, inspired by the towering full-body portraits of Diego Velázquez. On the right is a study of a head of a young man by Manet, that he based off the Renaissance painter Filippino Lippi's self-portrait. This is Le Clair de Lune sur la Porte de Boulogne. This one is called Le Vieil Jeune de Rochefort. Manet called this one Sur la Plage, which means on the beach. On the right is a painting called Lola de Valence from 1862, based off of a Goya portrait, and on the left is a bullfighting scene. This is great to see. This is Whistler's mother. It is a very famous painting by the American artist James McNeill Whistler of his mom that he did in 1871. Sometimes this painting is referred to as the Victorian Mona Lisa. Being one of the most iconic American works outside the United States, this painting does go back across the pond sometimes. I last saw it at the Art Institute of Chicago several years back. This is an early Renoir piece called Le Garçon au Chat. Here are the Femmes au Jardin, a large early work of Claude Monet that he completed in 1866. The painting was heavily damaged during Monet's lifetime, and apparently it just went through a major conservation effort. It looks pretty good. This is a depiction of the studio of Frederic Bazille by Frederic Bazille. This Monet from 1863 is called Cour de Ferme en Normandie. Here's another piece by Monet, depicting his coin d'atelier, his workshop corner. They sure have a lot of Monets here. They have a temporary exhibition on Aristide Maillol. There is a whole Maillol museum quite close to the Musée d'Orsay here in Paris, but right now they're doing a big exhibition of his work here too. Here's a self-portrait by Aristide Maillol, who did much of his work in the early 20th century. He was originally a painter. This one is called The Wreath of Flowers from 1889. This is a woman with an umbrella painted in 1892. This one's titled The Adoration of the Magi, painted in 1904. He did some textile work early on as well. In the 1890s, he opened a tapestry shop in his hometown of Banyuls, in the south of France. He also worked with ceramics, but he was most famous for his modernist sculptures of life-size mature nude women. So the rest of this exhibit has lots of nude women statues. The one on the right is Mediterranean. This is the bronze version of his sculpture Pomone. Maillol was commissioned to make this monument to Paul Cézanne. A bronze of this sculpture was placed in the Tuileries garden. This one is called La Rivière. Apparently he recycled an older work to make this. And this one is known as the Mountain. Below that panoramic view of Paris, there is a 19th century 3D model of Paris under the floor that visitors can walk right over. It's a scale model of the Opera Quarter as it was being built under the Haussmann renovations. Here's a really cool cross-section model of the Palais Garnier. And this is a depiction of the grand stairway inside the Palais Garnier. This is an antique miniature model set of some ruins by the sea. This is a mock-up model of a covered food market that was presented at the Exposition Universelle of 1878. This scene depicts an artillery charge in the Crimea. This is La Danse by Jean-Baptiste Carpeaux. It was once part of the facade on the Palais Garnier. This is Carpeau's Huguelin. We saw the concept plaster for this sculpture earlier. He does look rather nervous. Up on the second level, there's a bunch of great sculptures by Auguste Rodin. This is a plaster cast for the Gates of Hell. It was made in 1917 based off of the parts Rodin had already made, but apparently it's not quite completed. This monumental work was based on Dante's Inferno from the Divine Comedy. Here's a pair of Rodin busts. And here's a plaster cast of Rodin's iconic Thinker that was made in 1900. It was originally created as part of the Gates of Hell, but it turned out he made for a pretty good standalone sculpture. Here are some pieces by Pierre Bonnard and Edouard Villard. Bonnard was one of the major post-impressionists. He was also part of the Nabi. All of these works are from that era. This is Playing the Banjo by Pierre Bonnard from 1895. And this is a portrait of the brothers Bernheim-Jeune. This is The Large Garden by Bonnard. Definitely somewhat Japanese inspired. These are busts by Antoine Bourdelle. This is a bust of Madame Renoir by Pierre-Auguste Renoir. At the time he made this, his hands were nearly paralyzed by rheumatism, so he had some help to make this for her tomb. This is Hercules the Archer, one of Bourdelle's most iconic works. There are some more Bonnards in this room. This is the Box from 1908. This is a later Bonnard piece from 1940, well beyond the Musée d'Orsay's time period limit. This is Bourdelle's bust of Beethoven. Here's a bronze copy of Maillol's Mediterranean. And behind her is a polar bear. This is a Washerwoman by Rodin. Here is Rodin's bust of Victor Hugo. This is Rodin's version of Huguelin, who ate his own children. This is a portrait of Madame M by Henri Rousseau. They have several pieces by Rousseau in this room. He had a very distinctive style, I love his stuff. This is the Snake Charmer from 1907. Here Eve is playing a flute and charming a snake in the Garden of Eden. This classic Rousseau scene is called War, also known as the Rite of Discord, depicting a woman holding up a sword sitting on a horse jumping over a bunch of corpses. They have another big Art Nouveau exhibit on this level, but I'm about out of time. Here's St. Michael slaying the dragon. This is a plaster relief called the Nubians, which was designed for the facade of the Musée d'Histoire Naturelle here in Paris. And on the opposite side is the Eagle Hunt, also created for the Museum of Natural History. And this is a monument to Jerome, also known as the Gladiators. This gallery features some naturalist art from the Third Republic. And finally, the Statue of Liberty by Frederica Auguste Bartholdi. So the Musée d'Orsay is indeed one of the greatest art museums ever. The art here is absolutely incredible, and you have to visit this place for yourself. If you enjoyed this video, then please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Also take a look at my other videos featuring art museum tours, other types of museums, historic sites, natural wonders, and more here in the Paris area, as well as across Europe and America. Make sure to check out my video on the special Antoni Gaudí exhibit, as I caught it in its final days. That video is linked in the description. Thanks for watching.